bad.
Never forget.
That's gonna be like the Trump thing that like came out 20 years later on a hot mic.
Clay on public television saying it was locker room talk.
I swear I didn't mean it.
Alrighty, and we're rolling.
Okie dokie.
All right, we're back.
Yes, we
Roman once again. When was the last time? The last time was at the Coyote Fest or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. We just caught up over coffee a little bit ago.
Do I look like ridiculous with this thing up here and
I can just turn yours down.
some down here?
No.
No, it's just it messes with my equilibrium, and like when everything is kind of drowned out like this.
It
makes
is
me
kind
very
of strange.
anxious.
It makes you feel like you're like, I don't even know, but like kind of isolated from the environment or something.
Yeah, it makes me feel like I'm underwater a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I don't enjoy that.
But thank goodness we got the delay out of it from that first one. Because that was so weird. You would just be like speaking and it'd like short circuit your mind. It was like, okay, it sounds weird, but the delay was like 1 second on what you were saying. So you'd hear like exactly what you said like as you were speaking. And it would just like shut you down.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but
There's certain I've had headphones that do that before. Not like the headphones themselves were doing that, but there was an app that was really popular for a while that would do that.
really,
Just to mess with your speech, to show you that you couldn't speak if you were hearing yourself in that like delayed manner.
supposedly if you listen to the same word over and over again, you'll like start hallucinating or like you'll start hearing different words. And then you'll like, you can kind of like zone out or get like hypnotized by it.
Yeah, I've kind of encountered stuff like that. Like in my psychology class, you talked about a thing where if you hear the same phrase over and over again, you'll start to hear music with it. Like,
Really?
well, not like you won't hear like a backtrack, like some Bach in the background. No, it'll just be like the words themselves will turn into like it'll sound like a song to you because it'll have its own cadence, and you'll start to get used to that cadence, and then it'll develop
Even if it's
into,
the
like,
same cadence the whole time?
Yep.
Really?
It'll sound like some kind of loop to you, like song
Yeah.
lyrical loop.
Yeah, I think back in the 60s or 70s, they were like doing experiments like that where they would just loop a word. I know I read about it in Lilly. Do you know John Lilly? John C. Lilly?
What did he do?
He's famous for giving acid to dolphins.
Oh yeah, okay.
He also invented like the sensory deprivation tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that was like one of his things because he messed with hypnosis too.
I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it
He's
seems
out
like,
there.
I wouldn't be that surprised if something like hypnosis were possible, but it just does not seem to be the case.
Yeah, what
Like,
do you
it'd be
think about it?
It'd be too useful if it were real. I feel like more people would be investing in hypnotism.
What do you think about stage hypnotists though?
Oh, that's probably just like suggestibility.
Yeah,
So-
like if you volunteer, you're probably more likely to like follow the command, do you think, or what?
Not necessarily, 'cause, I think if you're on stage, the social pressure will just make you do it. I think because a lot of people that volunteer, they tell themselves, "Oh, I'm not going to play along,"
Right.
And they end up playing along, and they always have like the same story, like, "Oh, he actually hypnotized me." But I think
Yeah, they like
it's just-
act like they didn't know what was like that it was happening or something.
Yeah, but like if you've ever been on a stage and you look out and see like hundreds of people looking at you, or God forbid thousands of people, you immediately would act differently. Like once you get off, you will notice that you were saying things that you wouldn't normally say, or like acting in ways that you wouldn't normally act.
Right. That's what I mean. I've heard stage hypnotists go on and say that it's like not like they just like use like simple manipulation or like stuff like that. That it's not like they're actually like have someone under hypnosis or something like that.
Yeah. Do you know who Mesmer was? Like Robert Mesmer or whatever.
I mean, that's where like mesmerized like the word
Yeah.
comes from, right?
Yeah, it was.
He was like, was he healing people back in like Dark Ages or something like that, or is this a different
No.
person?
No, he was like late 1800s, early 1900s.
Late 1800s. Okay, what was he doing?
He was basically working with hypnotism, but mostly with women. Like he worked on hysteria and
Oh,
ways of mitigating it. It
Didn't,
turned out it was just like a fashion thing because of the corsets they were wearing was causing a lot of.
really? I
yeah.
thought it was like a sexual repression thing.
That was Freud's theory on some of it, but I think most of the causes for hysteria were determined to be fainting from having too tight of a corset, so your circulation would become poor, and then you wouldn't be able to have like proper cognitive functioning at that point.
Okay.
They also had poor nutrition to boot, so it was
Right.
not a great time, I guess, for women.
Yeah. So what did Mesmer do?
He worked on hypnotizing women into like removing their like mental illnesses. He also who is the guy that played Professor Snape in Harry Potter? I can't think of his name.
I don't know. I don't think I've even watched a Harry Potter movie.
Jamie, could you look that one up for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on, Jamie.
'Cause I know Alan
Don't
Rickman.
text on the job.
It's Alan Rickman.
That's what I said.
Oh, sorry. Anyway.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah. Anyway, he played Mesmer in a movie once, but a lot of what he did just seemed like he was having his own fun, because he did hypnotize women, and he said that just by talking to a woman, he could give them an orgasm.
Yeah.
He had learned how to hypnotize them into like,
I've heard people say that.
being
they do that.
irrevocably sexually attracted to him.
So that's like the same people that do like the like energy healings. What's that called? Like Rika or something like that?
Reiki or
Reiki. They run their hands like over someone like that, and they like see so much of that probably is just the suggestibility of like the human mind and how much control you actually have over your body with your mind, but you just don't access it.
Yeah. I don't know how much control the body would have over the mind. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody really knows. Have you ever seen, if you sit down, it's especially easy with like a child, but you can do this with just people that are our age or even older. If you just sit down and you start talking like, oh, do you remember that one time we did this? Even though you know you never did that with that person, if you keep suggesting it, they'll eventually be like, oh, you know what? I do remember that. And they'll actually feel as if they remember that. But it never happened. I've had this occur with a few of my friends before, where I've said something, and I've told a story, and I know they were not there, but they think that they were there.
It's probably a thing just to like keep social cohesion, so you don't like.
Probably.
Yeah, what was that? I just heard a story like that where people can actually, they actually would like create memories, and it was supposed to be an evolutionary benefit so that they didn't like have a falling out with somebody like in their, like just somebody like that. Like they would actually visualize things that didn't actually happen, or like even make like computational mistakes or like logical mistakes, and they wouldn't even realize it. And they had them under MRI, and they would see like different regions fire up, but they never like cognitively like knew it. Like they never consciously knew what was going on.
That's strange.
I wish I could pull the exact example up, because it would probably make a lot more sense with the actual.
Was there like a correlation in, I guess you might not know this without the document, but like in the regions that would fire in their brain with like regions that would fire if it were a memory that they consciously were aware of, like having created? Like if they told the person to make a story up, would the same regions fire as when the story that they had made up unconsciously or
I don't know.
subconsciously?
I don't know about that.
It'd be strange.
I wish I could remember the exact. I can't remember right now. But I don't know. A lot of those social experiments were really interesting. I mean, do they still run some things like that?
Like what?
No.
What do you mean social?
Man, that was crazy.
Like Milgram experiment type things?
What's the Milgram experiment?
That's the one. I think it's this. Isn't that the same thing as the Stanford experiment, or is that a different one? No, I think, okay, the Stanford experiment, I think, was the one where they put people in prison. They put, like, students in prison, and then they tried to see how they would act. The Milgram experiment, I think, was the one where they took people from some college, like Yale or something, and they basically put one of the people in a room, and they hooked them up to, like, a battery, and they told another person, if you press this button, it will not electrocute, but it will shock that person. It will hurt them greatly. And they basically ended up finding that if they knew that the other person wouldn't figure out who had pressed the button, they would always press the button just to do it.
That's pretty
Mess
funny.
with them.
Yeah. Huh. Just, there was nothing else was going on there, just to see if they would just do it just because.
I'm assuming that it was to
like they didn't
test-
get shocked themselves or anything.
No. I don't believe so.
And there was no like reward for shocking the other person.
No.
Wasn't there a thing about how they told, like, they made up something and they were like, they told the person with the button, like, that person in there, like, doesn't like you or something, or that person there, like,
Oh yeah.
doesn't like something about you, and then they, like, to see if they would shock them harder, knowing, like, how bad it would hurt.
Mhm.
Sometimes they would do it up to, like, it, like, maybe this is a different experiment, but they didn't, there was no actual shock. Like, there wouldn't even
Yeah.
actually be another person.
Right.
They'd be like, that person said something about you, and they would turn it up enough to, like, kill them.
That's how the Milgram experiment was.
It's crazy.
That was, but I don't.
It's crazy how cruel like humans can be without, especially without social pressures like exerted on them.
I guess it's weirder to me that people can do anything that seems kind or like good.
Really?
Yeah. 'Cause
Why?
I feel like it'd be more natural to have an inclination towards just pure self-interest and like looking out for absolutely no one else other than yourself until society had formed. Like for you and me, it doesn't work the same way because we can't use that kind of ethos and get a job and like work in society, and we
Right.
can't even survive without being part of society now. But like in an agrarian society where you're all farmers, it seems like it would be the best thing to do to just kill everybody that threatened you in any way and just be the strongest person around, basically.
I mean, I think some of that probably went on. That's probably a lot of the like tribal battles or like biblical Old Testament like
Oh yeah.
fightings and stuff. But I think you would still want a strong society like around you though, and then go and fight the outsider.
Well, if you have no idea what society would be like, I feel like it'd be very natural to be very adverse to it.
That's really difficult because there is such an advantage of being in a pack or being in numbers, especially for humans. Like humans on their own, I don't think they wouldn't really survive without a community.
Well, I think that's kind of what family structures are for. I guess like if somebody shares your blood, you're more inclined to, or more accurately, your DNA, you're more inclined to help them out, do things for them. You could have packs like that that are family based rather than just species based, I guess. Whatever you'd want to say.
That made me think of like in other primates, the high levels of infanticide and stuff like that. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, gorillas are almost like completely killing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They just go after the children of others.
I've heard even bears do that a lot too.
Yeah, male bears can't be around their own kids even.
Yeah.
Because they get really, really aggressive for some reason.
Well, it makes the females like go into heat, doesn't it? Or like
The aggression of the male?
no, a killing of a child.
Maybe. I don't really know.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard that maybe. That they go in and kill like rivals' children and then mate with the females.
That'd be interesting. Well, I've heard that females, after having a child, will take it away from the male as far away as possible because the male will kill its own kid.
Mm.
And I know
That doesn't make... What would the point in that be? That's so strange.
to kill its own child.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be something. There is in like mandrills, the a female will basically trick other males into. So once a female gets pregnant, it'll go around. I think it's mandrills, but it'll basically go around and mate with a bunch of men so that they can't tell whose child she's carrying.
Right.
So it tricks all of them, so none of them will go after the child. But it could just be like the bear.
I mean, there's
reasoning
theories that
you
happened
never
in
know.
tribal humans as well.
Like polyandry, like one woman mating with a lot of men.
Mm-hmm. And that they would all raise the child because they didn't know whose it was.
For that, it's like really common in certain farmer societies where they'd have like brothers because they knew that like both of the brothers couldn't mate and they couldn't both get like the land that their father had, so they would just stick together with one wife, and have children.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's, I mean, I guess agrarian society is like a straight, like that was probably where everything started to really split from pre to that. Like, I mean, that's where you get probably all like possession of private property and accumulation of wealth and
I would assume.
more society forming.
Have you ever read anything from Thomas Hobbes or John Locke from when like the Americas were first discovered and their like writings on property?
No. Well, I've
Basically.
like clips of the Leviathan, but
Oh yeah,
Nothing in depth.
There were a lot of passages. It would basically, I think, particularly John Locke was of the opinion that because the Native Americans didn't have the same kind of formal systems that we do, that they didn't have property like we do, because they hadn't acquired it like monetarily or through the transfer of goods typically, and they didn't lay claim to any land because they just lived nomadically. So that's how they basically reasoned to the idea that it was just okay to take their land,
Right.
because it wasn't their land, it was nobody's land.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that was just creating a reason to go take the land.
Post hoc reasoning. Yeah, I definitely think it was, but he made an effective argument for it.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, I think a lot of that was probably to take it, but I mean, it is interesting. Private property is what basically the whole capitalist system is able to. That's why it's able to function.
yeah.
Or really, most of our economic systems. If you took that away, I don't know what. I mean, you wouldn't really have a system at all.
You just have a communal thing, some form of communism.
Yeah, I don't know how you would distribute things at that point. But yeah, that's a lot of the people, even now, are talking about. Well, I told you I was in Europe, so I was kind of some of the seminars there were on degrowth, which is basically an economic philosophy to end GDP growth, and even to like cut into it in some things. But they were talking about, in some ways, like the decommodification of certain things, like land or say like food, water, like any food and drink, land, healthcare, things like that. So the thing with that is I just don't know where they think your food's gonna just come from if you're not really if it's not a commodity.
Yeah, there are certain aspects of that would make sense, I guess, like getting rid of something like bottled water, which is just absurd that even exists, really.
Yeah.
Like disposable bottles of water, but looks like reduce that kind of commodity. But there would always have to be some way in which you're paying for that kind of thing, like your necessities.
Yeah, I think the idea would maybe just be that it's like a socially funded by the community, but
well, wouldn't the individual still be paying into it?
Yeah,
the individual has to be
through
part
taxation.
Of the community.
Yeah,
that wouldn't really help anything.
No, I don't think so either. I guess, yeah. The idea would be maybe that if there's not as much private property, there'd be less greed in your system. But I don't know that would pan out.
I don't know. I feel like being greedy is kind of built into being human or being a mammal, really. Like,
maybe.
Isn't that like that's like one of the primary things that the serotonergic system regulates is your drive to collect and like gather resources. You just want to have a bunch of stuff because it makes you feel like you have greater chance of survival if you're surrounded by things.
Mm-hmm. Everybody, I mean, then people always point to like dolphins or bonobos and things like that, though, and say that they're more or that they, I don't know, kind of care for each other more. They're more communal. They are less
More
jealous
ethical.
creatures, maybe.
I don't see that. I think that people take like particular instances of them being like that. Especially, bonobos are just hedonists. They just sit around and like have sex all day. I don't see how they're good. They're good people. Or
yeah, I think that a lot of people like to run with that and say that that's like a case for polyamory and humans and stuff, and that they're not as jealous of creatures or whatever. But
there's still like plenty of reports of violence in bonobos, and they're not perfect creatures,
right?
But are not perfect ethically, like people assume. And with dolphins have been known to like rape a lot of other things.
Humans,
like
right?
Rape. Yeah, they try to rape humans. Maybe I don't know if anybody's ever actually been raped by one, but
they like attack trainers and stuff at certain areas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's strange. I've also heard dolphins will take people into the pot, like surfers and stuff like that, or people snorkeling. Like they'll kind of like welcome them into their pod.
Yeah, dolphins kind of like people.
Mm-hmm. Back to take a break. All right, we got to take a break. Oh, I remember what I wanted to discuss with you. Okay. That book I wrote over there that was about, I think I maybe texted you about it. It was about lost manuscripts that a book collector found. Like, he was actually a scribe for the Catholic Church, like in the 14 or 1500s. It was...
like the Voynich manuscripts?
No, it was On the Nature of Things, Lucretius.
Oh, Lucretius on the Nature of Things.
Yeah. He found it in a monastery, and it was like the only copy left in Europe. And he ended up copying it and spreading it around. And I guess it kept like a lot of ideas alive. It had a lot of Epicurean philosophy like in it. And it like really spurred off like a lot of problems with the church. And it was so crazy because he was like the head scribe, like directly under the Pope. His name was Poggio, something like that. But he was just a antiquities collector, and he would like go out to these monasteries to try to find books and have them copied. And it's really an interesting book because it was a book about books and how they changed the course of time, like lost manuscripts and stuff. And it was really, I mean, you don't really think of ideas like being that powerful, I guess, now, because everything's kind of open and like easily accessible. But that was like the last vein of a lot of that philosophy, a lot of the Epicurean philosophy. And it was like really, I mean, a lot of it was basically heretical depending on how strict the Pope at the time was.
Yeah, at least its effects certainly were. I mean, that's where most of modern physics comes from, like atomic theory.
Atomism was in it, yeah.
Yeah, it comes from Democritus, which went through Epicurus into Lucretius, which I think he's the only one that really wrote extensively on it. So, well, all of that book is pretty much a poem, because that's just how they wrote at the time. So it's kind of difficult to get anything concrete from it.
Yeah.
It does talk a lot about, like atomism, like atoms floating through the void.
I had no idea that was an idea from
What?
that. The atoms were an idea from Greek times.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It originally came from Democritus and this one other guy. I'm going to say like Lucius or something. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But they just had it to oppose like the other metaphysical theories of the time, like monism and different pluralisms. And it wasn't like they knew that atoms existed. He just posited that if you kept breaking something down, eventually you would get to a point where you couldn't break it any farther.
Right.
And that would be an atom, which is what atom means, like unseparable or separable.
Yeah, I know it was funny to see how the Catholic Church kind of danced around with it too. Like for a while they outlawed it, and then for a while they actually took atomism on and used it as a way of describing like, what's that called, the transubstantiation, or what is it when like the bread and the wine, they use that to say that the bread and the wine was actually like the body and blood of Jesus Christ, and that because it was made of the same atoms. And that was like official church doctrine for like several years, like maybe a couple of decades.
That's pretty weird.
They used it to explain that, yeah. But then it went from there, and it kind of started touching into the Protestant Reformation, because a lot of the Catholics at that time, at least the people high up in the social structure, were really pretty secular. So a lot of them were doing sciences and humanities and stuff. And
in the 1500s?
Yeah. It really shaped. I mean, you hear about the Dark Ages. I don't think they were actually like completely devoid of reason and thought and stuff like that. I think mostly you just saw like a bit of a decline from high Roman, high Greek culture.
So it was like just after the Golden Age in the Middle East for knowledge, and India. Yeah.
Another thing I really got interested in, I started, because there would be these heretics, and they'd call them before tribunals, which were called diets. So there were all these different diets, which are basically, they would gather the whole, the Holy Roman Empire formed after the Roman Empire collapsed. The Pope was the head of it. And he's basically elected. But then there were two colleges, which were basically legislative bodies. And there's actually an electoral college, which I guess is where it inspired our electoral college. But it was made up of delegates from all the different like regions and countries. They were like independent states within the Holy Roman Empire, and they would send their own delegates to go and vote on things. So the Holy Roman Empire was about all of Central Europe. It went from Italy all the way up like about German area, a little bit north, just the whole central. And then I think France was also included in it. But they ended up having basically a complete legislative body. They would vote on a lot of the matters, and they ended up taking a lot of the power away from the Pope. But then it went into the Protestant Reformations and kind of some of the trials of heresy.
Have you ever heard the quote from Voltaire? He said the Holy Roman Empire was never holy, nor Roman, nor an empire.
Yeah.
Because he just said it was like discoherent political bodies, and hedonists, basically.
Well, they would write satires, people working in the Vatican, about how terrible it was. I mean, they would have apparently just brothels, drunkenness, like just right in the Vatican. Any excess, any pleasure, any hedonism was available right there. And just total corruption of power.
There was one pope, and I can't remember. It might have been like a Pope Alexander or something of that nature. But he had like a predecessor that he was very competitive with, and he always wanted to take the papacy from him, but he never could. So after the guy died and he became pope, he had his body dug up so he could have a mock election, and he won the election because obviously the candidate was dead. And he had him like in the I don't know what their primary cathedral would have been, but he had him like sitting in the throne, and he had his body dragged out, beaten, and thrown into a river. They ended up finding it later, and it was put back in the crypts, I think.
That is the one. I mean, it's just insane, some of the rhetoric they would use to get around some of their just completely like brutal and vile actions that they would take.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to, especially with some of the recent allegations of sexual abuse and things like that. It's kind of crazy that the Catholic Church has still survived to this day and is as powerful as it is. I mean, it's lost a lot of influence, but still.
It's amazing to me that they allow the Vatican to exist as like an independent city-state. Like it's its own thing with its own power or centralized power.
Did you see they just they were investigating a murder case from like the 80s or 90s, and they just found a whole like building, like they closed it off with like a brick wall, but this whole area full of bones in the Vatican.
Really?
Like just old bones, like tons of bodies that nobody knows how old they are or like where they're from, but they were just dumped in there. It's insane. But no, being over in Spain, there was some Roman influence there. Like they had the original Roman walls, and they had some of the remains. Like they had part of a city that they kept it actually, but they had some of the old like baptism pools and like wineries, things like that. But it's just crazy to see, and some of the artwork there was Roman, and it was all religious works, and it's crazy just to see how much like Christianity has changed, like from its roots or from its relatively early stages till now.
That's interesting. Didn't most of like the Roman Civil War take place, or not most of, but a lot of it take place over by the edge of Spain? So like Pompey had all that area.
I think so, yeah.
Caesar had to come and conquer it.
Yeah. The area of Barcelona had been taken over. I mean, it had been it was independent, like tribal. The Romans had it for a while. Islamic groups had it for a while. I think it was independent again. And then I think Germanic tribes maybe came in after the fall of Rome. I'm not entirely sure about that, but and then even up until, I mean, the dictatorship in Spain just ended in I think the 80s.
Really?
Yeah. So they're only a lot of the people I was talking to, they're only one generation out from like their parents lived under a dictatorship or at least grew up under a dictatorship. So there's a lot of like kind of political angst over there still. Because that region, Catalan, they still want to be independent from Spain. And so just I think it was 4 years ago or something, they signed a referendum to leave, and everybody that signed it, like most of the politicians that led the effort, were exiled or jailed. So
Wow.
it still is a big thing over there.
Imagine if they did that to Quebec.
Yeah. Did Quebec motion? When did that happen?
In '95, they had a referendum, and they're trying to have another one now, I think.
Are they
heard that
just
there's
because they're French speaking? Do they have a different culture or what?
I don't know exactly. I guess they have a different culture, probably mostly because of the language barrier, but they also have there are a lot of political differences between the people in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada, I suppose. But there were also several provinces, the ones that are like right along the border of like North America and like the Midwest, that said that if Quebec left, they would just try to join America. Because there'd be no point in having Canada anymore.
That's crazy. And how much of what role they're technically part of the British Commonwealth, right?
I guess, yeah.
Like I was talking to some people from Australia and they were like, yeah, we're part of the Commonwealth. What even is that? Just like if they go to war, they go to war with them, or is there any other like?
I don't think there is like a military obligation, because I don't like.
I just wonder what that even means anymore.
It means the Queen is on their money, I guess. I think technically the Queen or the royal family can seize power in those places or have like some kind of veto power, but I don't think it's great.
Well, I don't even think the royal family really has much say in Britain anymore, do they?
I think if they wanted to, they could, but I think they'd probably be shut down.
Yeah.
So, like, on paper they do, but they never do anything. Really not. I have no idea how that works.
It's crazy just the last 200 years of history, like from the just crazy imperialism of European nations to being shrunk all the way back, like through the world wars, and
now we're on to globalism.
Globalism is. It really is kind of sad when you're in some of those places and you see like the same huge chains. Like I know that's not like the core of globalism, but that's like a side effect of it, kind of.
Yeah.
I think it's really good, but it's just like kind of things could maybe get too homogenized with globalization.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really don't like, the homogenization of culture. Like if you ever seen the picture of the Great Pyramid of Giza and the nearby pyramids, it's right next to a KFC.
Are you serious?
Like half a mile away.
That's terrible.
If you're at the pyramids, you can see the KFC. It's like completely, and just beyond that is like a whole metropolitan area. Like the history has kind of been neglected, and they just allow it to be commercialized. But that's kind of how it is around the entire world. If you go on like the Snapchat map, you can just click somewhere and see people's stories. If you go to Africa, there'll be people that are just doing what you do in America and like speaking English, but like broken English. I went to South Sudan one day expecting to see no stories. Like, no offense to South Sudan, but I was thinking, who has a phone in South Sudan?
Right.
And I clicked there, and there were 4 stories in a row where the caption was just lit, or this is lit.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
I think the internet has done like a great job. Like it's probably good that we're connected, but I have seen just like a crazy homogenization of culture, and it's really strange. I don't know that it's good for us.
I don't even know if it's an homogenization of culture, just an eradication of it. Like, is there any culture left if everybody's just doing the same things? And everything seems to be based around commodities now. Like, whatever culture is, it's mass produced. Like, nobody has paintings in their house that are originals anymore. They always have some reproduction of whoever.
Wave.
So what?
The Great Wave.
Yeah.
It's one everybody has. You know that one?
Is it?
Like the Japanese print.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Everybody has a Starry Night too, usually. Like some Van Gogh. And a lot of people have some random Dadaist painting and they try to imbue it with meaning.
That's the art movements that took place in Barcelona were pretty impressive too, or at least they were kind of offshoots from what was going on in France at the time. But the art museums there were just amazing. They had a lot of. We went to the Picasso Museum and it was all like his earlier works, so nothing really incredibly famous by him, but it was cool to see the progression. Same with Miro. Do you know Joan Miro?
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to. I think his museum was probably my favorite there in Barcelona.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It had that one was really a lot of his works, like from beginning to end. I didn't realize how many different mediums he worked in either. I always thought of just paint on a canvas, but
Like, what was the weirdest medium he used?
yarn. He did like
A yarn sculpture or like a
Uh,
two-dimensional yarn, like a lithograph or something?
like I guess maybe it wasn't even yarn. It was almost like a giant like yarn quilt that hung from the ceiling. It was probably 20 foot in height. Like probably 20 foot by like 10 foot or something like that. Like giant.
Wow.
He worked with metal a lot. He did a lot of metal sculptures.
Do you know who what is it? Agnes Martin is?
No.
She was a painter in the like mid 19th century. She did a bunch of stuff that was very like minimalistic, and it looked as if she did almost nothing to every canvas she painted. You'd have to like look close. They'd be like fine lines, and they'd usually just be very like orthogonal. And like there was one that she did, one of her like most famous works, and I don't know why. It's just an enormous grid, and seeing it in like a photo when you go on Google Images, it looks like nothing you would ever even think of as art, but it's enormous. It's like 30 feet tall by like 20 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the only appeal of it.
Just
I
the
don't really
size?
understand it.
Yeah.
Yes, I suppose there might have been some message behind it, but
Yeah.
I'm not too sure. A lot of art things tend to confuse me, and I tend to just assume it's somewhat arbitrary.
Right. I think a lot of them. I think they were just trying to break down barriers in art and trying to explore different things. I think eventually they hit a point where like realism was so like hyper realistic that there was not really that much more room to expand, especially with like photography coming and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, you can only make a still life so real probably, and they probably got bored of it. And I think also, I wouldn't be surprised if World War One had a big influence on a lot of those art movements coming up.
Definitely surrealism, I think.
I think people were really just kind of broken after World War One, like kind of lost faith in a lot of things, and tried to look for meaning maybe in different ways. What?
He just like yawned.
Yeah, you guys have 1 minute
To what?
till the next break.
Oh.
Well, I guess we can just take it here then.
Alright.
We'll take a break. What were we talking about previously?
Art.
Art. We always come back to the same topics on here all the time. Huh?
You like art.
I do like art. Yeah, I think art's important. I think I've already went on that rant before too.
What's important about art to you?
I think it's just a way of expressing yourself deeper than words, I suppose.
Language.
Or, yeah, it's a way. I think a lot of it is important culture. I think a lot of it is like cultural commentary on what's good in our society, but mostly what's wrong in our society. Same thing with, say, like comedy, which I mean, I view like comedy and music and like actual like painting or whatever as art. I view like a lot of different things as art, but I think a lot of them are just commentary on our culture and how we can do better, I guess.
Do you think it'd
What's
be
wrong?
possible, that it is possible to have any form of complex like thought or apperception without language?
Yes.
What would thought be without language?
I mean, I think it would just be a form or a feeling almost.
Feeling?
Yeah.
Like a perception sort of feeling, or a feeling like an intuition?
I'd say sort of like an intuition. I mean, I think there's things that you can think that aren't words.
I know
You can have thoughts that are
you can have visual thoughts,
visual,
but
or
you usually reduce them to words. Like
Yeah.
you can see something. I can like very vividly imagine something being right in front of me, but I can't really comprehend it or do anything with it without language. I don't
Right.
think.
but I think there's a lot of things that language can't capture though either.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. Um,
I think what art, if it's good art, I think it can break through maybe barriers that you've set up as well. Like it'll kind of slip through your, like during your active day, like your conscious mind, I think you have like so many barriers because you're so busy, or you've already like decided like how you think or like what your value structure is. I think good art is able to like slip through your defenses a little bit and kind of like make you like reevaluate.
I suppose that makes sense, but I don't think that kind of idea would hold true for all things that you would consider to be art. Like, is that what you take to be the definition of art? Is something that is capable of doing that?
I know. I mean, I think there's lots of different ideas of art. I mean, I think when most people think of art, they think of drawing or painting or like a visual representation, I guess. And it could be very common. I mean, it can be anything. It can be like an advertisement or any media that's just commonly used that you're just like barraged with like daily.
Well, does that count as art? I would think for something to count as art, the intention would be very important. Like, I don't think graphic design would typically count as art because it's usually intended to just manipulate people.
Right. But if you think about that, that is a way of slipping past someone's conscious thinking
This is very
to get them
true,
to
but
purchase something.
it's not to make their consciousness slip past itself, though. It's to make its own message subliminal, so
Yeah.
that the individual does not consciously recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
And what you were saying about like good art, it almost seems as if it would make the conscious structure turn against itself, rather than just like zipping past it completely.
Right. So to make you reevaluate your own conscious thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose that's
Some of it I think is almost like, it can almost be like seeds too, where it like gets sown in your mind and it maybe won't, like something won't be activated immediately, but then later it might like something else will trigger it or something, and it'll kind of come back and change the way you think.
yeah. I've kind of had that experience. See, there are things that I take as being capable of doing exactly what you said, like pushing past the barriers that you set up around yourself to like limit your attention and whatnot, or your consciousness. But I usually, the only things that do that for me, or that seem to do that in general in my experience, would be like poetry. Or things that actually do have a sort of verbal aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's much easier to look at something like that and say, okay, well, this, and this tells me that this is the meaning behind this. Whereas when you're looking at a painting, it's so varied, and you could never really know the intentions of the author. Not that they're really relevant, I guess, to what the meaning may be, because you might have your own subjective meaning
Right.
put into it. But it seems like there is absolutely no way in which you could say the meaning that you're ascribing to it is actually there in the painting.
No, 100%. I agree. But can you do that with poetry?
I think you could. It would be much easier to make like a deductive argument to say like this is in this poem than it would be to say.
But in
this
some
is
ways,
the
to
painting.
sit and logically break down a piece of literature or poetry, you're kind of ruining a certain
Yeah,
like magic to it or whatever.
that's kind of a bitch. But
Which to me, like, same thing, because naturally I'm more inclined to words. Like, I'm not very good at manipulating like art form in the visual sense. I'm much better with words, and I receive words better, and I am pretty logical, so I do try to break it down. But I think sometimes there's something to trying to not logically deconstruct it
I feel like
that is valuable.
it seems to me as if people, at least in, I don't know, like higher intellectual castes of society or in like academia, are starting to push, or have been pushing for about the past 100 years since like logical positivism, that things like art and music and all of that, it's just nonsense to sedate people, and that really anything that is not based in hard logic is useless.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you that I think that that idea is wrong, but I don't know if there's a way of like expressing what's wrong about it. And I don't take all art to be equal in any way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what's.
Well, I think your art, a lot of it, it's almost like the soul of your logic is like your mind, but you can't be all in your head. Like, in my opinion, I think you need to be a more like holistic being, that you need to have some sense of the physical world, and then you need to have some like a deeper, I don't know what you would describe it to. I guess soul. Not now. I'm saying that could originate from wherever in your body. I don't think it's like necessarily an ethereal thing, but I think there's definitely a component to soul in humans that is touched by art.
So do you think that people have souls, like as an actual
In
thing?
some manner? I don't know that you could separate it from the body. I don't know.
Okay.
But I think that it's like a deeper, if you want to just say like subconscious or like almost, it's not emotional, because I think emotional is too like reactional, but something like seated, like maybe deeper within a person, beyond like the reactional of emotions or just pure logical thought.
That's
Something that's kind of, I don't want to say irrational, but almost irrational and deeper seated.
so. Do you consider yourself to be something like a dualist, like a substance
In what
dualist?
sense?
Well, while there is something physical about being alive, there's also something non-physical that imbues us with life, or that imbues life with meaning, possibly.
Yeah, but it could be rooted in physical.
What would separate that from just the thought that we already experience, or like the
I
modes
think
of
it's
being which we already
another
experience?
another level of thought.
So basically, like
I don't think
the
you access
unconscious.
it in your typical conscious thinking or typical logical thinking.
So kind of like the unconscious mind in like Freud or Jung or any
Sure, yeah.
psychoanalyst kind of idea.
Yeah, I think Jung maybe relates it to the soul sometimes.
Yeah, I think he only does it like metaphorically though. I don't.
Right.
It's not really clear what Jung believes in terms of whether there is a soul, or like if he was religious or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I recently bought a copy of Ion, so I've been rereading that a bit. That's pretty interesting.
Right.
But I don't know how much utility I think Carl Jung has. I don't know if it's just something that piques my interest, so I enjoy reading it, or if there's actually any truth to what he's saying.
I think if you want to talk about poetry, I think a lot of his stuff is almost more poetical, almost more of an art form than it is truthful commentary on psychology or whatever. But I don't know. I think there's value to be gleaned, especially in, I mean, his works on dreams and shadows and things like that, I think are kind of important.
Yeah, I think his work on dreams is what interests me the most, just because I've always been interested in dreams.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of made me wonder if the idea of the unconscious in Freud was like, if it came from Plato, because Plato had this idea of the tripartite soul, and it was pretty much like common belief in Greece, as we understand, that the what made a person was composed of three parts of a soul. It would basically be the logical portion, the appetitive portion, and the emotional portion. And they located these things in like different areas, like your appetitive portion or your appetitive soul was in your stomach, and then your thymoideus was in your heart, and your like logical processing, I think they put in your head.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
I mean, I like to break things down to that just because, I don't know. I think maybe some of it is the structures I've been brought up in, and I think it's also like a really good way of explaining it, whether it's accurate or not, of having three components to yourself, of a body, mind, and soul, or something like that. And I mean, I think they're so interconnected that you can't really separate them, but there's definitely competing urges and thoughts and desires within a human person.
Right, but I think most people, at least in modern academia, would reduce that to just like hypothalamic function versus like a superior cortical function.
That's true, probably, but that doesn't like capture the, like, you can know that, but I don't think it captures like the full idea behind it, I guess.
Have you ever thought it was strange that no matter how much knowledge you acquire, it never really has an effect upon your body? Like, I always wondered, what if actually having an understanding of different regions of your brain, or of the fact that you're comprised of cells, would give you some ability to like manipulate those things in your body that you didn't realize were even there before.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't. It absolutely opens no doors for you in terms of your own body, maybe
Yeah,
your
that's
own
very
mind,
strange.
obviously. But like, you can have full awareness of every part of your body, but it will never help you manipulate it more, other than like immediately, like through tools and instruments and things.
One area where I think that might be challenged is actually through lifting things. You can actually have like the same amount of muscle mass, but you can recruit more, you can fire more effectively and lift heavier things almost.
Yeah, because
And it's more of a mental exercise than it is muscular exercise.
yeah, because you always like unconsciously restrict yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because you know, you like, well, you don't know, but your body knows that it can't exert itself that much, or you'll be out for days, and you can't
Right.
afford to be out for days. So you'll never allow yourself to get to that point. But like, that's basically what adrenaline is. Like, it doesn't make you any stronger. It
It just reduces your
your inhibition of it. I
Uh-huh.
suppose.
Speaking of reducing inhibition, this is kind of a jump, but have you read or watched any documentaries on the effect of drugs in World War II?
In World War II, which drugs?
Amphetamines and methamphetamines.
A little bit, but
So supposedly the Germans and Japanese were heavily using methamphetamines, giving them out like candy to every, I mean, they were like in the rations for every soldier. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. I guess that's how most of the Blitz was kind of energized or whatever, because they could go 2 or 3 days and, run in a tank without really burning out and just cover so much ground. But then I think it caused problems because methamphetamines, they started getting really anxious and nervous. They couldn't sleep. So when they couldn't sleep, it just like started to break them down. And apparently the British and Americans were using the amphetamines. So they were a shorter window and they could still sleep, but then they could just use their drugs during the days, maybe get like 6 hours instead of like 24 to 48 hours or whatever of effect. And that apparently worked a lot better for them.
I've heard like a little bit about German use. I didn't know the Japanese or Americans or British.
I mean, think about a kamikaze. I mean, I get like you have the ideals built into them, but I think you'd still almost have to be a little drugged up to go fly your plane into someone.
Yeah, but I don't think amphetamines would give you that kind of intoxication to be able to do something like that.
Really?
Yeah, because like pretty much all amphetamines do is increase the level of norepinephrine in your brain and dopamine, but like slightly for dopamine. I mean, enough to where it's an addictive drug, but not enough to where it's like absolute euphoria or anything like that. But increasing dopamine just makes you really, really alert, like kind of on edge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we kind of do that now. We're very, very lenient with how we like distribute Adderall and Ritalin for a while.
Yeah. That is something, isn't it? There is a probably pretty good portion of American population on amphetamines.
Oh, yeah. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was around like 20%. Probably just below that.
It's so strange how we choose what drugs that we're okay with in the U.S.
Yeah, I know. It always makes me think of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.
Mm-hmm.
But I tend to think like, if he were right about the way in which society would be in the future, the drug that he referred to in the book would be something more like what our phones are for us. They keep us more sedated than any drug really ever could, or not phones in general, but like internet technology, anything like that. It's keeping you in a position where you feel as if you have this incredible power and incredible knowledge that is unparalleled in all of history, and yet you're still just as far in the dark as pretty much anybody else on most issues.
It's really just a drain eventually.
A drain.
A drain on your your mental resources, I think. Phones are.
Yeah.
Because you come across so much media like constantly. Most of it's all junk. You spend so much time filtering through stuff that you end up just kind of wasting your time. And I think you only really have so much, I don't know, like almost like mental capacity at one time that you have access to.
Yeah.
And I think it uses up kind of a lot of bandwidth or whatever you would call it.
There have been a few studies recently on like multitasking, whether people are actually capable of like cognitively multitasking. And it turns out they've found no evidence that people can do that, like whatsoever. If you're doing two activities at the same time, what you're actually doing is switching between them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not focusing on the other one at a certain point in time, and you're not focusing on the other at a different point in time, which basically leads to you having like half of an understanding of each thing.
Right.
Which is not effective at
Right.
all. But
I would agree with that.
people still try constantly.
I don't know. I kind of have an idea that people are actually becoming worse, like almost like devolving or whatnot. Like I think on average people are becoming weaker physically, and I think they're becoming less intelligent.
Weaker physically on average?
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Really?
Than past generations?
Maybe in like the past 100 years, but like I think if you went back any time before the like beginning of the 20th century, people would be far stronger on average now than ever
because of food?
weightlifting, nutrition, weightlifting were larger in size than we were previously. People never used to really exercise like that. They would just live their lives, and that would be exercise. Like you never really see paintings of people with six-pack abs or anything like that because they never had muscle like that. People were never. I don't think people were ever that large unless they were like athletes, and that was a very select few people. And even then, I'm not sure what they would really do for a workout.
I don't know. I guess there's really no way to tell, is there?
No.
Exactly.
But
I think intelligence-wise, I think we're declining as well.
yeah.
I think we all have more like access to intelligence, but I think like our own cognitive ability is declined because of that.
I think people are more closed-minded than they ever were before. I think any argument that anybody has at any point in time will always just end up deferring to Google, and then nobody will ever actually put any more thought into it than that. It's just whatever Google says. That's what it is. They're just credulous. It's like worse than what people thought Christianity was for a while, in my opinion, because oftentimes it's wrong.
Yeah, that is kind of a strange. What's up? We're out of time. Take a break.
That one actually right out. Like right after you said break.
Okay, so we're just that. Oh, gosh. Google is God.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe creative thought or like reasoning skills have declined. Like there might be more general knowledge available to everyone, but less thinking.
Like average IQ has increased. People attribute that to nutrition.
Really?
Because it's plateauing. But at the same time, it's not entirely clear whether IQ measures what we mean when we say intelligence, like ordinary people, as opposed to like psychologists. It may just be the kind of psychometric thing that appeals to the people that study it, when in reality it doesn't pertain to the actual idea of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. How did they come up with a broad IQ like metric for?
They made thousands and thousands of tests, and there are different forms of IQ tests, but basically they would keep doing this, and like they would distribute the tests to thousands of people, and they would see which questions co-varied, and they just figured out whichever ones co-varied with basically like capacity for solving certain problems. Those would be the ones that they determined were measures of intelligence. And then they concentrated all of those into a few
right. But how did they like estimate it across populations?
They take like a sample size. Gotcha. A lot of people, oftentimes if if you're like arrested, they'll subject you to certain psychological experiments. Like if you're in prison, they'll take you and give you IQ tests, and
That's quite a thing, isn't it?
and if you're a student in psychology, you're constantly involved in those tests,
Mm-hmm.
in like a university and stuff.
What do you think about psychology? I mean,
Have you ever heard of?
I think there's.
It's one of my minors, so I have to like it a little bit. But I think I only like the actual study of the psyche, like the subjective study of the psyche, because most of psychology seems to suffer from the same things that like sociology and other social sciences do, where it's just like survey based, and they never recreate the survey, so they just run with it, and it's completely inaccurate. And also, do you know what the p-value? You know what a p-value is, right? In sciences.
What about that? Or like what?
Like the measure of the null hypothesis to the alternative hypothesis, like the percentage that your hypothesis is accurate, basically. Okay. The acceptable p-value for psychology, I think it's 0.1. Mm-hmm. It's the highest p-value for any field of study. It's also the same for sociology, but for physics, it's like 0.0001.
So basically, that's saying that your hypothesis is correct more often than the other sciences.
Yeah. So for
basically, you're kind of.
It's less limited.
Possibly, you're running your experiments in a way that are going to affirm your hypothesis.
Yeah, like that's kind of confirmation bias, but like for having like a 0.1 p-value for psychology, that basically means that they will publish a theory and say that it's true if it's true 90% of the time. There can be 10% of the time where it's completely false, but they'll still say it's true. They just neglect to like acknowledge that. No other field of science is like that whatsoever. I don't know why it's like that exactly. I've heard a few reasons. There's also
with the social sciences, I think they kind of are just running away. I mean, it's not a hard science really. Like you're saying, a lot of the experiments are not repeated. I think you get about anything published in a peer-reviewed journal in social sciences.
Yeah, there was that one guy that got a philosopher that got the like dog sexuality paper published.
That one was great. Queer performativity of dogs. And
yeah,
that was a good one.
You'd like this. There was one philosopher in like, I don't know, like 2012 published a paper, and it was called The Causal Effect of Absence. The entire paper was blank. There was nothing there. It was just a title, and he published it. And
the same group that got the queer performativity in dog parks paper passed through. They did one. They took passages of Mein Kampf and they removed Jewish and put in white male.
Yeah,
and like I think they almost got that one through too. It's insane. But I think they went overboard with that
remarkable. One. They were not the first ones to do that either. There was somebody in the 90s that did it. I can't remember his name. He was a physicist, and he published a paper in like a very popular magazine that was just complete nonsense. None of it was accurate, and they published it right away.
Well, that's what
like
I mean.
Academic magazine, not just any of it.
I've spent a lot of time this summer, like probably half my time this summer was spent reading academic peer-reviewed journal articles or papers or whatnot, publications, and then trying to write my own. And you really think like there's no way anyone is going to recreate like what I did. You know what I mean? It's just so much of it is just, you just have to be responsible for your own thing, but somebody could definitely just make up numbers and values and kind of throw them in there.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anyone's really checking it. And even the peer review, they're not really diving that deep into it. They don't have enough time. They're just kind of looking to say, okay, like that makes sense, kind of, and passing it along.
Recreation studies aren't getting any funding anymore because people are like, oh, somebody already did that. We're not giving you money. Because they don't really understand how sciences work. They have to run by like falsifiability. But
even with statistics, you can imbue about any meaning you want into a paper.
What do you mean with statistics?
Like you can kind of come to a conclusion regardless of what the statistical results are of your paper. Like there's certain, at least in a lot of the things I see in a lot of the data sets, you can pull certain things to make an argument. You can make it in either way. You can make it in either direction. You can
like aggregating data, like kind of like the wage gap thing. People reprojected the data and it came to a completely different conclusion, but people still are on both sides arguing for it. And yeah, it's pretty easy to skew data like that, I imagine. I think, I don't know.
There comes to a point too where like the human mind cannot comprehend so many points of data. Like when you start working with sets that are so large, then you come up with these metrics to try to like approximate them and to break them down to something that's like roughly understandable for a human mind. It's like even what I was working on was small. Like it was only 2,500 points. You can't look at 2,500 points and compare them to another thing in an analysis. Like you can't. Like all I was doing was just changing things by percentages kind of throughout, but you can't compare them like that. So you have to break them down to some metric that somebody's designed and to try to look at it through that. So I don't know. I think in the sciences, there's a lot of room for, especially in social sciences and stuff, that it's not clearly repeatable. There's just a lot of room for error and for like kind of pushing your own bias into it.
I think pretty much all sciences probably suffer from bias. So there really is no way to definitively prove anything scientific other than saying, like making a statement and then running some experiment to show that the conclusion supports your statement. And even then you're not technically proving anything.
Right.
You're just saying in this circumstance at this time this worked, therefore I must be right, but it doesn't really follow logically from that is true. It's just like the problem of induction. But I don't know.
I'm gonna shift completely on you. What do you think about this upcoming election? Have you followed the Democratic debates at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's goofy how much focus they're putting on like Democratic candidates, and pretty much anybody outside of the Democratic Party has not been even recognized as running yet.
Such as?
Well, I mean, I don't know many people that are even saying anything about their campaigns that have there are a lot of people that are independent that are planning on running, but they're not putting in the same effort that the Democratic Party is right now. Like, I don't really understand why when it's so early on, I don't understand why the Democrats are having so many debates that are pretty much leading nowhere. Like everybody keeps complaining about it's just not the right format for that kind of thing. Like,
there's too many people.
Yeah, there are too many people, and they each get like 2 minutes to talk about their ideas that are really complex, and they can't get them all out in that amount of time. Well,
that's how any debate is, it seems like, and that's when you get into like who can make the best soundbite, and it's like almost a popularity contest or something at that point. It's a really strange format. It's really kind of strange how, I mean, our representation system right now, that you listen to two people talk like 3 times for an hour, you vote on them and give them basically the keys, like basically the power to most of this country's military force.
Most people don't even put in that much effort. They won't even watch like the debates. They just go and vote, and they pick whoever is on the party that they enjoy. That's why I think we should have like an epistocracy, something, you know, like you should have to pass a test in order to vote. Mm-hmm. Or if you pass the test, then you get like 2 votes, or your vote has more value than somebody that didn't pass the test.
Right. I agree with that. I know a lot of people would have problems with that, though.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a way, but then, you know, there's been voter discrimination of the same, because they used to have like ballot tests and stuff like that where they would deny people.
You just can't allow that kind of thing to happen. I mean, you could almost do that now, even just turn someone away at like the polls. But I feel like even if that did happen, it would almost be better, especially because you can't really discriminate against people that way anymore because of the internet. Everybody has the capacity and the ability to do as much research as they want on the candidates. Like, you just go to the library and get free Wi-Fi or a free time at the computer and research candidates all day long. That's probably why, personally, I don't think I'm going to vote unless I feel like really passionate about some candidate that's coming up, which there are a few I kind of like on the Democratic side, but I don't usually.
Who do you like on the Democratic side right now?
Pete Buttigieg.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's interesting. But I don't think there'd be any chance that he would win.
Right.
I do not like Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders at all, or the one woman.
Which?
The like...
Warren?
What?
Warren?
Yeah, Warren. Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
I don't really like her very much either. I don't like their policies or ideas. I don't like them as people.
Mm-hmm.
But...
Have you listen? Have you heard of Andrew Yang?
Yeah, I
Seen
think
any
he's
of
kind of
Yang stuff?
interesting.
He's interesting. I don't think he'll gain any traction or anything.
No. What was
What's crazy is Trump could win in a landslide, like if the economy stays strong.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Trump
if
has the
won.
best chance. Biden's not gonna come close to him.
No,
Sanders won't.
I mean they're both pretty popular, but I don't think. I mean Donald Trump, he's not popular, but I don't know if there will be a better option.
I know it's crazy, but I think he really could be elected again. And it's crazy how much hatred there is for him. I mean, he says some terrible and stupid things, but usually if you ask people like, what don't you actually like about Trump, they can't answer you. It's
always
really
about-
strange.
It's always about his character
Yeah.
and just like ad hominems that don't really follow. Like, I get that he said some things that aren't PC or whatever you want to say, like politically correct, but he doesn't exactly seem to be a racist or an anti-Semite or anything like that, like people are claiming. He's
Right.
not like a violent person. He's never really done anything that vile. I mean, maybe some sketchy business practices, but to be honest, if you're in his position, you're probably going to do the same thing. Like, every human being is corrupt to some extent. I don't see why you wouldn't act the way that he has acted. He's
Right.
done well for himself, so.
I wonder how much, if he's playing a fool, like kind of playing a character in some of these things, if he's actually more calculated or if it's all just, if he's actually just winging everything.
I think he's playing
It's
playing
hard
a
to tell.
character.
Yeah.
'Cause I think he realizes that just rousing up a crowd is more important than actually putting down any great ideas on paper.
Right.
Like, just having the spotlight, like, of media on you, even if it's bad, like, even bad publicity is good publicity, or whatever the old saying is. Yeah.
That's, I think where the racist thing, the like let them go back to their countries or whatever, which is what everybody claims is racist. I think that might have actually been a smart political move. I think he was taking and those are the most radical individuals in the Democratic Congress. And he was basically making it so that the Democrats had to claim them, and by that means claim their ideology. And he almost backed them into a corner where they have to support that crazy of an ideology at this point, which isn't compatible with like the general public right now, I don't think.
Yeah. Although he's also kind of driving the Republican Party to do things that they wouldn't normally do and to behave weird ways, but I don't think he really cares about that.
Right.
He's
I think if anything, it was probably good just to shake it up a little bit from someone who has been in politics for a long time, that was part of the kind of norm. And because, I mean, if you look at the last several presidents, they're really not good. Like,
No.
you look at the Bushes, Clinton, what he did, even Obama, for as much as everyone loved him, there were still, I mean, just crazy things going on. I mean, you look at the wars, the killing, the drone bombings in the Middle East.
Supposedly the conditions at the immigration camps at the border were exactly the same then.
Under
or
Obama.
even worse.
Yeah, that's
certain
correct
reports, so.
from what I've heard.
And nobody even talked about it then. Or at least not publicly, or like as far
That's
as I
what
can see.
it almost turns me off to so much of like in my heart, I want to do good by people and be kind of like socially not an activist, but I want to support people and support their well-being and stuff. But then when you look at so much of politics, it like almost turns you off to that, because you see, they take something like that and they just warp it into a way to like gain power, to gain political influence. And then even even in social media, everybody latches onto something like that, and it's like they just have to like affirm that, oh, I share these beliefs, and it's almost like they're propping themselves up as like a superior moral character or something like that. And it's like, I think everybody kind of has those basic beliefs and wants
Yeah.
to see people do better.
People really keep what's the term? Like, they try to turn people like Donald Trump and whoever opposes them basically into a villain. It's like, oh, this person. People do that to Bernie Sanders too, and they say like, oh, he wants to be a dictator of America and things.
Right.
Like, that's not what he wants. I think everybody realistically is doing what they think
is
is
best.
good.
Yeah.
That was a thing from Socrates. It was like one of the most badass things in philosophy. He said, no human being would ever do something that is bad because you would never think in the moment, I'm going to do the worst possible thing right now. Like when you're about to do the,
There
like,
might be some people.
no, well, it depends upon how you think of the worst. Like they would never do the thing that is the worst for them, ever. They would
Yeah.
never think like, oh, this is going to get me killed and there's no advantage to it, so I'm going to do it.
There's things though. I think people get really warped though, and end up
Yeah.
like they.
I mean, they go
switch
against
they switch moral or values and. But when is it ever good to go and kill a bunch of people or to rape or to anything like
It
that?
depends upon your values. If those are the things you hold to be virtues, then that is what you think is good.
Mm-hmm.
So like they go against your values, but to that person's, from that person's perspective, they're doing the best possible thing they can do in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Another big thing that it kind of drives me crazy is that everyone wants to respond emotionally to everything. Like there's no logical basis. Like I understand, like, you know, you look at the border situation, and that's something that like does have a real emotive response, but you still have to like try to go through a logical process of why it's happening, what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Same with a lot of areas and policy or whatnot. You still need to take a more of a logical approach, I think.
Yeah. Well, it seems that people just take that reactionary element of all things like that and use it politically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they ever... I don't know. It seems like when something terrible like that happens, they just use it to confirm the ideas that they already had, regardless of how the terrible thing would pertain to them if you just looked at it bluntly, logically, I guess.
I don't know. I just hope. 1 minute. I guess in closing, just think about things logically. I don't know. I think we have a lot of work to do as a society, and I think right now we're teetering between great collapse or great boom. But that's probably how it always feels.
Yeah.
But you know, our economy and social cohesion are kind of wobbly right now. But I don't know. I have faith we're gonna pull through pretty well.
It's good to be an optimist.
Well,
Oh, Pollyanna.
yeah, somewhere between optimism and pessimism.
Realism.
All right, done.
Get your pets spayed and neutered.